The emergency beacon cut through the cosmic void like a scream in the darkness. Chief Engineer Marcus Chen felt the vibration through the hull of the human cargo vessel Lucky Strike before he heard the computerized voice announcing the distress call. He wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades and made his way to the bridge, where Captain Sarah Torres was already studying the holographic display with a frown creasing her weathered features. "What have we got, Cap?" Marcus asked, settling into the engineer station. The bridge of the Lucky Strike looked like controlled chaos to most aliens. Exposed wiring ran along the walls, where panels had been removed for easier access. Handwritten notes were taped to various consoles, and a coffee mug with World's Okayest Engineer held down a stack of technical manuals that predated half the crew. "Galactic Confederation vessel Infinite Harmony," Sarah replied, highlighting the massive ship on their sensors. "Dreadnought class, crew of 47,000. Dead in space about 6 million kilometers from here." She paused, shaking her head. "Marcus, look at the size of that thing." Marcus whistled low. The Infinite Harmony was easily 1,000 times larger than their little cargo hauler. Even on the sensor display, it looked like a floating city made of crystalline spires and flowing metal curves that seemed to shift and change as they watched. It was the kind of ship that represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering, a vessel where every component was designed at the quantum level, where artificial intelligences managed systems too complex for organic minds to comprehend, where the very hull material existed in a state of controlled molecular flux. "Any other ships responding?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. 3 Confederation vessels were in range, Sarah said grimly. All 3 tried to dock and provide assistance. All 3 had their own systems crash within minutes of making contact. She turned to face him, and Marcus could see the weight of decision in her eyes. The Infinite Harmony sent out a general distress call after that. They're requesting help from anyone even. She gestured at their cramped practical bridge. "Even us primitives." Marcus snorted. Primitives. The word had followed humanity since they'd first joined the galactic community 50 years ago. While other species had evolved beyond physical tools, developing technology that operated on thought alone or required no maintenance whatsoever, humans still insisted on building things you could hit with a wrench. The galactic community tolerated them because human cargo haulers were cheap and reliable, but nobody expected them to solve problems that had stumped the greatest engineering minds in the galaxy. "What's their situation?" Marcus asked, already pulling up technical specifications on his console. His fingers danced across physical switches and dials, another primitive human trait that other species found baffling. Why use manual controls when you could interface directly with the computer through neural links or quantum thought matrices? "Complete power core failure," Sarah read from the transmission. Their quantum resonance cascade engine went into some kind of feedback loop. Every time they tried to restart it, the quantum field fluctuations interfere with their other systems. Life support is on backup power, which they estimate will last another 18 hours. Marcus felt his stomach drop. 47,000 beings, all depending on technology so advanced that it had become mysterious even to those who operated it. He'd read about quantum cascade engines in technical journals. They were marvels of engineering that converted matter directly into usable energy at nearly 100% efficiency. They were also so complex that even the AIs that designed them couldn't fully predict their behavior under all circumstances. "Any idea what caused the cascade failure?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "They're not sure. The ship's AI reported a minor fluctuation in the quantum containment field, tried to compensate automatically, and somehow triggered a complete system shutdown. Now, every time they attempt to restart, the engine's quantum signature interferes with the ship's neural networks." Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking. He'd never worked on a quantum cascade engine, but he'd spent 30 years keeping human ships running with whatever parts he could scrounge up. The fundamental principle was always the same. Energy had to flow from one place to another, and something was blocking that flow. "Have they tried isolating the engine from the rest of the ship's systems?" he asked. "The engine is integrated into every system on the ship," Sarah replied. "Their entire infrastructure is designed around quantum field manipulation. You can't isolate it any more than you can isolate your heart from your circulatory system." Marcus nodded slowly. That was the problem with highly integrated systems. When one part failed, everything failed. Human ships were different. They were built with redundancy, with backup systems, with the assumption that something would break and need fixing. Their motto wasn't elegance or efficiency. It was, "Keep it simple, stupid." "What's our cargo manifest?" he asked suddenly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "We're carrying industrial supplies to the Kepler Station construction project. Why?" Because, Marcus said, standing up and heading for the door, I think we might be able to help them after all. He paused in the doorway. Send a message to the Infinite Harmony. Tell them we're a human cargo vessel offering assistance, and ask for permission to dock. Marcus, Sarah called after him. What exactly are you thinking? He grinned over his shoulder. I'm thinking that sometimes the most complicated problems have the simplest solutions. And I'm thinking that ship probably has the most sophisticated tools in the galaxy for manipulating matter at the quantum level, but they might be missing something basic.
An hour later, they received clearance to dock with the Infinite Harmony.
As their small cargo vessel approached the massive dreadnought, Marcus couldn't help but be impressed. The ship was a work of art, its surface flowing like liquid metal in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Geometric shapes that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions rotated slowly across the hull, and energy cascades of pure light flowed through channels carved into the ship's skin. The docking process itself was a marvel. Instead of crude mechanical clamps, the Infinite Harmony extended tendrils of programmed matter that flowed around the Lucky Strike and created a perfect seal. An atmospheric tunnel grew between the two ships like a living thing, its walls shifting and adjusting to maintain perfect environmental conditions. Marcus stepped through the airlock carrying a single case of tools and immediately felt out of place. The interior of the Infinite Harmony looked more like the inside of a living organism than a starship. Corridors curved and branched organically, their walls pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns. There were no visible control panels or mechanical systems. Everything seemed to be controlled through direct neural interface or gestural commands. He was met by Commander Veltar, the ship's chief engineer. The Andromedan was tall and willowy, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of sadness. Her clothing appeared to be made of the same programmable matter as the ship itself, shifting colors and patterns as she moved.
Engineer Chen, she said, her voice carrying the melodic quality common to her species.
I must confess, when we received your offer of assistance, many of us were skeptical. No offense intended. None taken, Marcus replied cheerfully. I get that a lot. Would you mind showing me to your engine room? Veltar led him through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked. I should explain that our power core isn't like the chemical reactors your species uses, she said. The quantum cascade engine manipulates the fundamental forces of reality itself. The slightest miscalibration can cause space-time distortions or temporal anomalies. Sounds complicated, Marcus agreed. But at the end of the day, it's still just an engine. Energy goes in, power comes out, and something's preventing that from happening. They emerged into a vast chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The engine room was enormous, filled with floating crystals that pulsed with inner light. Streams of pure energy flowed between geometric shapes that existed in constant motion, creating patterns of impossible beauty. At the center of it all was the core itself, a sphere of contained space-time that seemed to bend light around it. It's beautiful, Marcus said, and he meant it. And completely non-functional, Veltar replied bitterly. Watch. She gestured to one of her technicians, who approached a control surface that materialized out of thin air. Energy started flowing between the geometric shapes, building toward the central core. Then, just as the system seemed ready to come online, everything flickered and died. The crystals went dark, the energy streams dissipated, and alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. Every time, Veltar said. We can initiate the cascade, but the moment the quantum field reaches critical density, it creates interference patterns that crash our neural networks. We've tried modifying the field equations, adjusting the quantum resonance frequencies, even rebuilding the containment algorithms from scratch. Nothing works. Marcus walked around the chamber, studying the system. It was incredibly sophisticated, probably centuries ahead of anything humans could build. But as he watched the technicians work, he began to notice something interesting. Your control systems, he said. They're all networked together, right? Neural links, quantum entanglement, direct thought interface? Of course, Veltar replied. It allows for instantaneous coordination between all ship systems. When the engine is running properly, the entire ship operates as a single, unified organism. And when the engine isn't running properly? Veltar paused. The interference from the failed quantum cascade disrupts all networked systems. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So you can't restart the engine because the engine is preventing you from restarting the engine. He set down his tool case and opened it, revealing an assortment of basic hand tools, spare parts, and several rolls of silver duct tape. Mind if I take a closer look at your control systems? For the next several hours, Marcus crawled around the engine room, studying the invisible control networks that managed the quantum cascade. Velta and her team followed him, explaining the incredibly complex systems with a mixture of pride and frustration. The neural networks are integrated into the ship's hull itself, one technician explained. Every surface can become a control interface. Every wall contains processing nodes. It's the most advanced distributed computing system ever created. I'm sure it is, Marcus said, lying on his back and examining the underside of a floating crystal assembly. But that's also the problem. He sat up, wiping dust off his coveralls. You've got a beautiful, elegant system where everything is connected to everything else. But that means when one thing breaks, it breaks everything.
He stood and walked to the central control station.
Mind if I try something? Veltar looked uncertain. Engineer Chen, I must stress that this system requires precise quantum-level calibration. One wrong command could destabilize the entire ship. I'm not going to touch your quantum anything, Marcus assured her. I just want to try a different approach. He opened his tool case and pulled out what looked like an ancient tablet computer, a flat rectangular device with a physical screen and mechanical input buttons. The Andromedans stared at it in fascination.
What is that?
One of them asked. Emergency control tablet, Marcus explained, connecting it to the ship's systems through a series of adapters and cables, completely isolated from your neural networks. No quantum entanglement, no thought interface, no fancy AI assistance, just basic input and output. He spent the next hour programming the tablet, creating what amounted to a crude manual override for the engine startup sequence. Instead of relying on the ship's sophisticated neural networks, his system would control the quantum cascade through simple electromagnetic signals, the kind of basic technology humans had been using for centuries. This is your plan? Veltar asked incredulously. You want to control our quantum cascade engine with a device that operates on electromagnetic principles from your Stone Age? Trust me, Marcus said, making final adjustments to his makeshift control system. Sometimes old-fashioned is better. He looked up at the assembled alien engineers. Now, the way I understand it, your problem isn't with the engine itself. It's with the control system getting confused by its own feedback. So we're going to bypass the control system entirely. He activated his tablet, and immediately the engine room began to change. Instead of the gradual, controlled startup they had attempted before, Marcus's system brought the cascade online in discrete steps, with crude but effective safeguards at each stage. The crystals began to glow, energy flowed between the geometric shapes, and power started building toward the central core. But this time, when the quantum field reached critical density, there was no feedback loop. Marcus's electromagnetic control system was completely immune to quantum interference. The neural networks that had been crashing remained offline, isolated from the engine startup process. The quantum cascade caught, held, and stabilized. Lights came on throughout the ship as main power was restored. The low hum of life support systems grew stronger. In the distance, they could hear cheers from other parts of the vessel as 47,000 beings realized they were no longer facing certain death. Incredible, Veltar whispered, staring at the readings on her instruments. The engine is running at 97% efficiency. How did you know this would work? Marcus was already putting his tools away. Because, he said with a grin, sometimes the most advanced technology in the universe still needs to be turned off and on again. You just needed a way to do it that didn't depend on the broken parts. But even as the Andromedans celebrated their rescue, Marcus was thinking about the next problem. Getting the engine started was one thing. Keeping it running while they figured out a permanent solution was another matter entirely, and he had a feeling that was going to require something even more primitive than electromagnetic controls, something that came in a roll and fixed everything from space station hull breaches to broken hearts. Something silver, sticky, and absolutely indestructible. He patted the rolls of duct tape in his tool case and smiled. The real work was just beginning. The celebration aboard the Infinite Harmony was short-lived. Marcus had barely finished packing away his emergency control tablet when alarms began sounding throughout the ship again. The beautiful crystalline displays that showed the quantum cascade engine's status started flickering between green and angry red, and the melodic hum of the power cord developed an ominous wobble. What's happening? Commander Veltar demanded, her usually composed demeanor cracking as she watched the readings spike across her instruments. Marcus checked his tablet, which was still connected to the engine's basic control systems. The cascade is destabilizing, he said grimly. Whatever caused the original failure is still there. My bypass just got the engine started. It didn't fix the underlying problem. How long do we have? Veltar asked, her pale blue skin taking on an even more pallid hue. Marcus watched the fluctuation patterns on his screen. At this rate, maybe 6 hours before we're back where we started, maybe less. He looked around the engine room, where dozens of Andromedan technicians were frantically working at control surfaces that materialized and dissolved like soap bubbles. I need to understand exactly what went wrong in the first place. Veltar led him to a diagnostic station that looked more like a piece of abstract sculpture than any computer Marcus had ever seen. Geometric shapes rotated slowly in mid-air, their surfaces covered with symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The failure began here, she said, gesturing to a particular configuration of shapes. A microfracture in the quantum containment matrix. A crack? Marcus asked, leaning closer to the display. Not a physical crack, Veltar explained patiently. A discontinuity in the mathematical structure that defines the engine's quantum state. Think of it as, she paused, searching for an analogy a primitive human might understand. Imagine reality itself developing a small tear. The quantum cascade engine operates by manipulating the fundamental forces that hold the universe together. When there's even the slightest imperfection in that manipulation, the whole thing falls apart, Marcus finished. Like a house of cards with one card missing. He studied the diagnostic display, wishing it had numbers and gauges instead of floating geometric poetry. How did this fracture happen? That's the mystery, Veltar admitted. Our AI has analyzed every possible scenario. There was no external damage, no system overload, no operator error. The fracture simply appeared spontaneously during routine operation. Marcus frowned. In his experience, things didn't just break for no reason. There was always a cause, even if it wasn't obvious at first. Can you show me the physical location of this fracture? Veltar looked confused. Physical location? Engineer Chen, the quantum containment matrix doesn't exist in normal space. It's a mathematical construct that defines how we manipulate fundamental forces. It has no more physical location than the number 7. Humor me, Marcus said. If this fracture was a real crack in a real piece of equipment, where would it be? Sighing, Veltar manipulated the diagnostic display until it showed a 3-dimensional model of the engine chamber. A red line appeared, cutting through one section of the floating crystal array. If the containment matrix were a physical object, the fracture would correspond to this location. Marcus stared at the red line, then looked around the chamber until he found the actual crystals it indicated. They were part of a complex array that hung suspended in the center of the room, rotating slowly and pulsing with inner light. Can we get closer to those? Certainly, Veltar said, leading him across the chamber. But I assure you, there's no physical damage to examine. These crystals are grown at the quantum level. They're perfect down to individual atoms.
They approached the crystal array, and Marcus pulled out a small flashlight from his tool case.
The primitive beam of electromagnetic radiation seemed almost comical in the midst of all the advanced technology, but it illuminated details that the sophisticated lighting systems had missed.
There, Marcus said, pointing to a hairline mark on one of the crystals.
What's that? Veltar leaned in close, then stepped back in shock. That's impossible. Those crystals are self-repairing. Any physical damage should have been corrected instantly. Marcus examined the mark more closely with a magnifying glass, another ancient tool that drew stares from the Andromedan technicians. It's not damage, he said slowly. It looks almost like, he paused, a suspicion forming in his mind. Veltar, when was the last time this engine was shut down for maintenance? Maintenance? Veltar looked genuinely puzzled. The quantum cascade engine is self-maintaining. It has been running continuously for over 40 years without requiring any manual intervention. 40 years? Marcus straightened up, his suspicions growing stronger. No system runs for 40 years without maintenance. Things wear out, parts degrade, tolerances drift. He looked around the pristine engine room. Where are your spare parts, your maintenance tools, your repair schedules? We don't have such things, Veltar explained. The engine is designed to operate indefinitely. The quantum processes are perfect. They don't degrade over time like your mechanical systems. Marcus snorted. Perfect systems don't develop mysterious fractures in their quantum matrices. He walked around the crystal array, examining it from different angles. Nothing is perfect forever. Even if you can't see it happening, even if your instruments can't detect it, entropy always wins eventually. He found what he was looking for on the third crystal he examined, another hairline mark, so small it was almost invisible. Then another, and another. Veltar, look at this. These marks aren't random. They're forming a pattern. As they mapped out the tiny imperfections, a clear picture emerged. The marks formed a spiral pattern around the crystal array, following the path of the quantum energy flows. It's like wear patterns, Marcus murmured. After 40 years of continuous operation, the energy is literally carving microscopic channels in the crystal structure. But that's impossible, one of the technicians protested. The crystals exist in a state of quantum flux. They should be immune to such effects. Should be, Marcus agreed. But they're not. He turned to Veltar. Your quantum matrix fracture isn't random. It's fatigue failure. The crystals have been operating at the edge of their tolerances for decades, and finally, one tiny flaw became a critical failure. Veltar stared at the crystal array with new understanding. If you're correct, then simply restarting the engine won't fix anything. The underlying wear patterns will continue to cause problems. Exactly, Marcus said, which means we need to either replace these crystals or find a way to compensate for the accumulated wear. He looked around the engine room again. I'm guessing replacement crystals aren't something you keep in stock. The crystals are grown in specialized quantum foundries, Veltar admitted. The nearest facility is 3 months away at maximum warp. And even if we could reach it, growing new crystals would take several years. Marcus felt the weight of 47,000 lives pressing down on him. The engine was holding together for now, but every minute of operation was making the fatigue patterns worse. Eventually, the accumulated damage would cause a complete cascade failure that even his primitive bypass system couldn't restart. What about compensation? He asked. If we can't fix the wear patterns, can we work around them? Veltar consulted her diagnostic displays. Theoretically, yes. We could modify the quantum field equations to account for the irregularities in the crystal structure, but it would require recalibrating every system on the ship. The computational complexity alone would take our AI weeks to solve. Weeks we don't have, Marcus pointed out. The engine's status indicators were already showing more instability as the quantum cascade fought against the accumulated wear patterns. He sat down on a convenient piece of machinery and pulled out a notebook, actual paper, with actual ink, another primitive technology that fascinated the aliens. Let me think about this differently, he said, sketching diagrams and scribbling equations. Your crystals are worn, but they're still functional. The wear patterns are causing irregularities in your quantum field, but those irregularities follow predictable patterns.
Yes, Veltar agreed. But compensating for those patterns requires precise adjustments to field harmonics, quantum resonance frequencies, and temporal phase relationships.
It's incredibly complex mathematics. Marcus looked up from his notebook with a grin. Or, he said, we could try something a lot simpler. He stood up and walked back to his tool case, pulling out several rolls of duct tape and a collection of small metal brackets. Engineer Chen, Veltar said carefully, what exactly are you planning to do with those primitive materials? I'm going to fix your quantum engine, Marcus replied cheerfully, with the same technology humans have been using to fix impossible things for over a century. He held up a roll of duct tape. This might look primitive to you, but it's actually an incredibly sophisticated material. It's made of a polyethylene film with an extremely strong adhesive backing, designed to maintain its bond under extreme temperatures, pressures, and electromagnetic interference. The Andromedans watched in fascination as Marcus began cutting strips of tape and attaching small metal brackets to them. The beauty of duct tape, he explained as he worked, is that it doesn't try to be perfect. It just tries to hold things together long enough for you to find a real solution. But how will adhering primitive materials to our quantum crystals solve anything? Veltar asked. Marcus grinned. Because your crystals aren't really quantum anymore, they're mechanical. 40 years of wear patterns have turned them into precision instruments with very specific tolerances. And when you're dealing with precision mechanical systems, sometimes the solution isn't to rebuild everything from scratch. Sometimes you just need to shim the wobbly parts. He began carefully placing strips of tape on the crystals, following the wear patterns they had mapped out earlier. Each piece of tape was precisely cut and positioned, with tiny metal brackets that would create specific electromagnetic effects. The tape creates micro-adjustments in the local electromagnetic field around each crystal, Marcus explained. It can't fix the quantum irregularities, but it can compensate for them by creating equal and opposite irregularities. Like putting a piece of cardboard under a wobbly table leg. This is madness, one of the technicians muttered. You're suggesting that primitive adhesive tape can correct quantum field distortions that our most advanced AIs can't solve. Your AIs are trying to solve the problem perfectly, Marcus replied, continuing to work. I'm just trying to make it good enough. He stepped back and examined his handiwork. The elegant crystal array now looked like it had been repaired by a particularly enthusiastic human mechanic with silver tape and metal brackets scattered across its surface. "It looks terrible," Veltar said faintly. "Yep," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "But watch this." He activated his tablet and began adjusting the engine parameters, compensating for the electromagnetic effects of his makeshift repairs. The quantum cascade engine's operation smoothed out immediately. The wobbling hum disappeared, the status indicators stopped flickering, and the power output stabilized at 99.2% of design specifications. "Impossible," breathed one of the technicians. "Nope," Marcus said, checking his readings one more time. "Just human." He looked around at the stunned faces of the Andromedan engineers. "Your engine will run fine now for at least a few more years, long enough to get to that quantum foundry and grow proper replacement crystals." Veltar was staring at the diagnostic displays in disbelief. "The quantum field irregularities have been completely compensated. The cascade is running more smoothly than it has in decades." She looked at Marcus with something approaching awe. "How did you know this would work?" Marcus packed up his tools, leaving the tablet connected to monitor the engine's performance. "Because," he said, "I've been fixing things for 30 years, and I've learned that the universe doesn't care how advanced your technology is. Entropy affects everything equally. And when entropy wins, you don't need a perfect solution, you just need one that works." As they walked back toward the docking bay, Veltar was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Engineer Chen, I owe you an apology. When we first called for help, many of us assumed that primitive technology would be useless against our advanced systems." "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I'm beginning to think that perhaps our technology isn't as advanced as we believed," Veltar admitted. "We've become so focused on perfection that we forgot the value of practicality. Your solutions are crude, but they work. Ours are elegant, but they fail." Marcus nodded. "There's something to be said for both approaches. Your quantum cascade engine is an incredible achievement, probably the most sophisticated piece of technology I've ever seen. But sophistication and reliability aren't the same thing." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Marcus said, "that the most reliable systems are often the simplest ones. The Lucky Strike is older than most of your crew, and she's never had a catastrophic failure because every system on her is designed to be fixed with basic tools by people who might not be experts."
He gestured back toward the engine room.
"Your ship is amazing, but it's also fragile. When something goes wrong, you need specialists and perfect conditions and months of careful analysis. When something goes wrong on a human ship, you grab a wrench and start hitting things until they work again."
They had reached the docking bay, where Captain Torres was waiting with barely concealed impatience.
"How'd it go?" she asked. "Fixed," Marcus replied simply. "They should be good for another few years." As they prepared to undock from the Infinite Harmony, Veltar caught Marcus by the arm. "Engineer Chen, I have one more question. Why did you help us?" "Your ship was carrying cargo on a schedule. This detour will cost you time and money." Marcus looked surprised by the question. "Because you asked for help," he said. "And because 47,000 people would have died if we didn't stop." He shrugged. "Seemed pretty straightforward to me." Veltar watched the small human cargo vessel pull away from her elegant dreadnought, its hull scarred and patched but utterly reliable. In her culture, efficiency and perfection were the highest virtues. But perhaps, she thought, there were other virtues worth considering, like the virtue of helping others, even when it cost you something. Like the virtue of solving problems with whatever tools you had available. Like the virtue of admitting that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most sophisticated one. As the Lucky Strike disappeared into the cosmic dark, Veltar made a mental note to revise her species' engineering philosophy. Perhaps it was time for the Andromedans to learn something from the primitive humans. Perhaps it was time to start keeping some duct tape on hand. 6 months after the Infinite Harmony incident, Marcus Chen found himself in the most unlikely place in the galaxy, testifying before the Galactic Confederation Engineering Council on the planet Synthesis Prime. The council chamber was a marvel of architectural impossibility, with floating platforms arranged in complex geometric patterns around a central speaking area that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Marcus stood at the center podium, feeling distinctly out of place in his clean coveralls and work boots, while surrounded by representatives from dozens of species, each more technologically advanced than the last. The Vorthan delegation floated in energy bubbles that shifted through impossible colors. The crystalline collective had sent geometric representations of their consciousness that chimed with otherworldly music. Even the most primitive species present had technologies that made human engineering look like stone tools. Engineer Chen spoke Council Prime Nexus, a being of pure energy that communicated through direct neural interface. You stand before us today because word of your unconventional solutions has spread throughout the galaxy. In the past 6 months, 17 separate incidents have been resolved using what can only be described as primitive human technology. Marcus nodded, trying not to fidget with the roll of duct tape he'd unconsciously pulled from his pocket. Yes, sir. Ma'am, your nexusness. He really hadn't been briefed on proper forms of address for energy beings. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembly. Please, Nexus continued, describe for the Council the incident aboard the Hegemony mining station Oar's End. Marcus straightened up, falling back on the simple truth. Well, their gravity generator had locked up. Seems they had some kind of quantum resonance feedback loop between the gravitational manipulation matrix and the station's rotational dynamics. Very sophisticated system, way beyond anything I'd seen before. And how did you resolve this feedback loop? Asked a member of the Ethereal Collective, its translucent form shimmering with curiosity. I hit it with a hammer, Marcus said simply. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds, chittering, whistling, harmonic resonances, and in one case what sounded like a small explosion. Marcus waited for the noise to die down before continuing. See, the problem wasn't really with the quantum mechanics, he explained. The problem was that one of the physical mounting brackets for the gravity generator had worked loose after 50 years of operation. The whole system was vibrating at a resonance frequency that interfered with the quantum field stability. A few good whacks with a hammer tightened up the bracket, stopped the vibration, and the quantum interference disappeared. You solved a quantum resonance cascade, said the Vorthan representative, its voice carrying harmonics of disbelief, by hitting it with a primitive striking implement. Technically, it was a ball-peen hammer, Marcus corrected. But yeah, pretty much. Council Prime Nexus pulsed with what Marcus was learning to interpret as intense thought. And the incident at the Geltar research facility?
Their matter compiler was producing flawed molecular structures, Marcus replied.
Turns out the problem was dust.
Dust?
Microscopic particles had accumulated on their quantum scanning arrays over the course of several years. Their cleaning systems were designed to remove organic contamination and energy residues, but nobody had thought about plain old dust. Marcus shrugged. I cleaned the scanners with a can of compressed air and a soft cloth. Took about 10 minutes. A representative from the machine hegemony, a species that had uploaded their consciousness into quantum computers eons ago, spoke with a voice like grinding gears. Are you suggesting that our most advanced technologies are vulnerable to mundane environmental contamination? I'm saying that all technology operates in the real world, Marcus replied. And the real world is messy. Dust happens, parts wear out. Things vibrate loose. Your sophisticated systems account for quantum fluctuations and dimensional phase variances, but sometimes they miss the basics. The basics, repeated the Crystalline Collective in perfect harmonic unison. Right, like making sure your equipment is clean, your connections are tight, and your moving parts can actually move.
Marcus looked around the chamber. Don't get me wrong, your technology is incredible.
But incredible technology still has to deal with physics, and physics is the same for everyone. A new voice spoke up from the Galactic Confederation's own delegation. Admiral Kethvar, a Centaurian whose species had been among the first to achieve faster-than-light travel, leaned forward in her floating command chair. Engineer Chen, these incidents you've resolved, they represent some of the most critical failures we've seen in decades. The Infinite Harmony alone carries a crew larger than most human colonies, yet you've consistently solved these problems with tools that our databases classify as museum pieces. Because museums remember things that work, Marcus said. Look, I'm not saying advanced technology is bad. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you can manipulate matter at the quantum level or bend spacetime to your will. But somewhere along the way, you've forgotten that simple solutions often work just as well as complex ones. Elaborate, requested Nexus. Marcus thought for a moment, then pulled out the roll of duct tape he'd been fidgeting with. Several delegates actually recoiled, as if he'd drawn a weapon. This is duct tape. It's made of cloth mesh, polyethylene film, and rubber-based adhesive. The total material cost is maybe 2 credits. But I've used it to patch hull breaches, secure loose wiring, repair broken equipment, and even perform emergency medical treatments. He held up the roll so everyone could see it. It's not perfect. It's not elegant. It doesn't interface with quantum networks or respond to neural commands, but it sticks to anything, works in vacuum, handles extreme temperatures, and can hold together just about anything long enough to find a proper fix. And you believe, said the ethereal representative, that this primitive adhesive is superior to our advanced materials? Not superior, Marcus corrected. Complementary. Your advanced materials can do things duct tape never could, but duct tape can do things your advanced materials can't. Such as? Such as being simple enough that anyone can use it without specialized training. Such as being cheap enough that you can afford to waste it. Such as being reliable enough that it works the same way every time, regardless of what other systems are running. Marcus looked around the chamber. When was the last time any of you fixed something with your own hands? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Finally, Admiral Kethvar spoke. Our technologies are designed to be self-maintaining. Manual repair is unnecessary. Until it isn't, Marcus replied. Every system you've asked me to look at was self-maintaining right up until the moment it failed catastrophically. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think you've become so focused on making perfect technology that you've forgotten how to make robust technology. Explain the distinction, requested the machine hegemony representative. Perfect technology works flawlessly under ideal conditions, Marcus said. Robust technology works adequately under any conditions. Your quantum cascade engines are perfect when everything is calibrated exactly right, when there's no contamination, when all the components are within tolerance. But when something goes slightly wrong, the whole system collapses. He gestured to his coveralls, which bore the stains and patches of decades of practical engineering. Human technology isn't perfect. Our engines are inefficient compared to yours. Our computers are slow. Our material science is primitive, but our stuff keeps working, even when it shouldn't. We build in redundancy, we design for failure, and we make sure that when something breaks, ordinary people can fix it with basic tools. A new voice entered the conversation, soft, melodious, and carrying an undertone of great age. The speaker was an ancient, one of the eldest races in the galaxy, so technologically advanced that they had become something approaching gods. Young engineer, the ancient said, its form barely visible as a suggestion of light and shadow, you speak of trade-offs between perfection and robustness. Do you not think it possible to achieve both? Marcus felt the weight of eons of wisdom behind the question, but he answered honestly. Maybe. But I think the attempt to achieve both is what's causing your problems. He took a deep breath, knowing he was about to offend everyone in the room. You've all become so sophisticated that you've lost touch with basic engineering principles. The chamber erupted again, but this time the sounds were clearly protests and outrage. Marcus held up his hands for quiet. Hear me out, he said. Every species in this room has technology that can manipulate fundamental forces, create matter from energy, or travel between stars. But how many of you actually understand how that technology works? Our AIs manage the complexities, began the Vorthan representative. Exactly my point, Marcus interrupted. You've delegated understanding to your machines. When something goes wrong, you ask your AIs to fix it. But what happens when the problem is something your AIs weren't designed to handle? What happens when the solution requires thinking outside the parameters your machines were programmed with? He pulled out his ancient tablet computer again, its primitive display looking almost comically crude in the advanced chamber. This tablet can't manipulate quantum fields or interface with neural networks. It can't even connect to most of your systems without adapters. But it also can't be confused by quantum interference, crashed by neural feedback, or disabled by software conflicts. When I need something that absolutely, positively has to work, I reach for primitive technology. Are you suggesting, asked Admiral Kethvar, that the Galactic Confederation should abandon advanced technology in favor of your primitive methods? I'm suggesting, Marcus replied, that you should remember why we build technology in the first place. Technology exists to solve problems. If your advanced solution is so complex that it creates more problems than it solves, then maybe it's time to try a simpler approach. Council Prime Nexus pulsed with deep thought. Engineer Chen, you have given us much to consider. But I must ask, do you truly believe that primitive human technology represents the future of galactic engineering? Marcus laughed, surprising himself and probably everyone else in the chamber. No, he said. I think human technology represents the past of galactic engineering. The question is whether you want to remember that past or keep repeating the same mistakes. He looked around the chamber, seeing confusion, offense, and in a few cases, what might have been thoughtful consideration. Look, I'm not trying to insult anyone. Your civilizations have achieved things that humans can barely imagine. You've created art that exists in 11 dimensions, built cities that float in the hearts of stars, and developed technologies that make gods jealous. He held up the duct tape again. But sometimes you just need to stick two things together so they don't fall apart. And for that, this works better than all your quantum entanglement and programmable matter. He paused. The trick is knowing when to use which approach. The ancient spoke again, its voice carrying notes of something that might have been approval.
Wisdom often lies not in choosing the most sophisticated tool, but in choosing the most appropriate one.
Exactly, Marcus said. And sometimes the most appropriate tool is a hammer.
Or duct tape. Or a can of compressed air. He grinned. The universe doesn't care how advanced your civilization is. Entropy doesn't care about your technological sophistication.
When something's broken, you fix it with whatever works.
Admiral Kethvar leaned back in her chair, studying Marcus with new interest.
Engineer Chen, the Confederation has been discussing the creation of a new position, Chief of Practical Engineering. Someone to consult on problems that our traditional approaches can't solve. Would you be interested? Marcus blinked in surprise. You want me to become a Confederation official? I don't know anything about politics or administration. We don't want you for politics, Kethvar replied. We want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Travel the galaxy, fix things that are broken, and teach our engineers that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Marcus thought about it for a moment, then smiled. Can I keep my duct tape? I think, said Council Prime Nexus with what definitely sounded like amusement, that the duct tape is non-negotiable. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out of the chamber, Marcus found himself surrounded by engineers from dozens of species, all eager to learn about primitive human repair techniques. The ancient drifted over, its presence somehow both vast and intimate. Young engineer, it said, you have reminded us of something we had forgotten. In our pursuit of perfection, we lost sight of practicality. In our quest for sophistication, we abandoned simplicity. The being paused. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to learn from the humans once again. What do you mean, again? Marcus asked. The ancient shimmered with what might have been a smile. Oh, young one, did you think this was the first time humanity had taught the galaxy valuable lessons? Your species has a gift for finding simple solutions to complex problems. We would do well to remember that gift. As Marcus left the council chamber, his head spinning with the implications of his new position, he couldn't help but pat the roll of duct tape in his pocket. Somehow, a simple adhesive tape had become a symbol of human ingenuity. He grinned. If the galaxy wanted to learn about human engineering, he was more than happy to teach them. Starting with the most important lesson of all. When in doubt, apply duct tape and see if that fixes it. Usually, it did. 2 years into his role as Chief of Practical Engineering for the Galactic Confederation, Marcus Chen stood in the converted cargo bay of his new ship, watching the most unlikely engineering class in galactic history. The simple solution, his official Confederation vessel, looked like someone had crossed a luxury yacht with a hardware store. While it maintained the elegant curves expected of advanced spacecraft, every surface was covered with tool racks, spare parts bins, and informational posters showing basic mechanical principles. His current class consisted of 24 of the galaxy's brightest engineering minds, representing 12 different species. Dr. Zafali, a cognitive weaver whose species had transcended physical form centuries ago, hovered nearby in her containment suit, occasionally flickering with what Marcus had learned to recognize as intense concentration. Commander Rix of the Hegemony stood rigidly at attention, his cybernetic enhancements whirring softly as they processed Marcus's unconventional teaching methods. Even young Kethar, Admiral Kethvar's daughter and a prodigy of dimensional engineering, sat cross-legged on the floor, taking notes with an actual pencil on actual paper. Today, Marcus announced, we're going to learn about the most important tool in any engineer's kit. He held up a standard claw hammer, its wooden handle worn smooth by decades of use. Who can tell me what this is? Tentacle arms, energy manipulators, and robotic appendages shot up around the room. Marcus pointed to Kethar. A kinetic force application device, she said confidently. Anyone else? Doctor. Zephali's form shimmered. A primitive implement for applying percussive energy to resistant materials. Commander Rix's optical sensors focused on the hammer with mechanical precision. An inefficient tool that has been superseded by molecular disassemblers and quantum restructuring devices. Marcus grinned and hefted the hammer in his hand. It's a persuader. The class stared at him blankly. When all else fails, he explained, Sometimes you have to convince a piece of equipment to do what it's supposed to do, and sometimes the most effective argument is a gentle tap in the right place. He walked over to a workbench where he'd set up a demonstration, a mock-up of a typical Galactic Confederation power coupling, complete with quantum stabilizers, neural interface nodes, and enough sophisticated components to build a small starship. Dr. Zefali, this coupling isn't functioning properly. Using your species' standard approach, how would you troubleshoot it? The cognitive weaver extended tendrils of pure thought toward the device, interfacing directly with its quantum matrix. I would perform a complete diagnostic scan, analyze the mathematical relationships between all components, construct a virtual model of the system's intended function, and then... She paused, her form flickering with confusion. The quantum signatures are all within normal parameters. According to my analysis, this coupling should be functioning perfectly. Commander Rix? The cyborg approached the device and extended multiple sensor arrays from his chassis. Data streams flowed across his optical displays as his enhanced brain processed information at superhuman speeds. All electronic systems nominal. Quantum resonance stable. Material composition within acceptable tolerances. No identifiable malfunction detected. Marcus nodded and picked up his hammer. And yet, he gave the coupling a single gentle tap with the hammer. Immediately, the device hummed to life, all its indicator lights shifting from red to green. The class erupted in the multi-species equivalent of shocked murmurs. How? Demanded Kethar. Because, Marcus said, setting the hammer down with ceremonial reverence. Your sophisticated diagnostic systems can detect quantum fluctuations, but they can't detect a loose wire. He pointed to the coupling. Specifically, they can't detect a loose wire that's making intermittent contact because it's vibrating at exactly the resonance frequency of your quantum stabilizers. Doctor, Zefali's form brightened with understanding. The quantum signatures appeared normal because the connection was functioning during diagnostic scans but failing under operational conditions. Exactly. Your equipment told you everything was perfect because it couldn't see the real problem. Marcus picked up the hammer again. This hammer doesn't interface with quantum systems. It doesn't run diagnostic algorithms. It doesn't try to be intelligent at all. It just applies force where you pointed. Sometimes, that's exactly what you need. He walked back to the front of the class, noting the various expressions of confusion, frustration, and dawning comprehension among his students. This brings us to Chen's first law of practical engineering. The sophistication of your diagnostic equipment is inversely proportional to its ability to detect simple problems. Kethar raised her hand. Sir, are you suggesting that our advanced diagnostic systems are actually counterproductive? I'm suggesting, Marcus replied, that they're tools, just like everything else. They're very good at detecting the kinds of problems they were designed to detect, but they're terrible at detecting problems they weren't programmed to consider. He gestured around the room. How many of you have ever personally repaired a piece of equipment? A few hands went up tentatively. Not supervised the repair, Marcus clarified. Not ordered someone else to do the repair. Actually gotten your hands dirty and fixed something yourself? The hands went down. In the end, only Kethar kept hers raised. What did you repair? Marcus asked. My personal transport's navigation system, she said. It kept calculating incorrect trajectories. I spent weeks running diagnostics, rebuilding the quantum pathfinding algorithms, even replacing the dimensional sensors. Nothing worked. What finally fixed it? Kethar looked embarrassed. I cleaned the input sensors with a damp cloth. There was a film of atmospheric residue blocking the scanners. Exactly! Marcus clapped his hands together. Chen's second law. The most sophisticated problems often have the simplest solutions. But you'll never find those solutions if you don't get down to the component level and actually look at the hardware. Commander Rix's mechanical voice carried a note of skepticism. Chief Chen, while these examples are instructive, surely you cannot suggest that primitive manual techniques are superior to our advanced automation systems across all engineering disciplines. Not superior, Marcus agreed, but complementary. He walked over to another demonstration setup, this one showing a cross-section of a typical hegemony quantum processor. Commander, tell me how this processor handles error correction. Rix's optical sensors focused on the device. The quantum error correction protocols monitor the system's quantum state continuously, detecting and correcting any decoherence events in real time using redundant quantum entanglement matrices. And what happens if the error correction system itself develops an error? The redundant systems would compensate. And if they all develop the same systematic error?
Rix paused, his processing indicators flashing.
That scenario has a probability of less than 1 in. It happened last year, Marcus interrupted. The endless recursion lost its entire quantum processing network because a software update introduced a systematic error into all the redundant systems simultaneously. They were dead in space for 6 hours while their AIs tried to debug themselves using debugging tools that were themselves corrupted. The class was silent, absorbing the implications. How was it finally resolved? Asked Dr. Zephyli. Marcus grinned. Engineer Patterson manually rebooted the system using emergency override switches, physical switches, mechanical contacts, technology from humanity's pre-space era. He looked around the room. Sometimes, when all your sophisticated solutions fail, you need something so simple it can't possibly be corrupted by the same problem that broke everything else. He moved to the next demonstration, a mock-up of a typical power distribution network. Dr. Zephyli, your species ships use pure energy matrices for power distribution. Very efficient, very elegant. What happens when those matrices become unstable? We recalibrate the harmonic resonance frequencies to restore stable energy flow patterns, she replied promptly. And if the calibration systems are affected by the same instability? Dr. Zephyli's form flickered uncertainly. We implement backup harmonization protocols, which failed on the Wisdom's Edge because the instability was caused by interference from a nearby pulsar, Marcus said. The harmonization protocols kept adjusting to compensate for pulsar interference that wasn't actually there, making the problem worse with every correction attempt. How was that resolved? Cathar asked, though Marcus suspected she was beginning to see the pattern. Emergency power couplings, Marcus said, pulling a bundle of thick cables from under the workbench. Physical wires carrying electrical current from emergency generators to critical systems. No intelligence, no automatic calibration, no sophisticated management protocols. Just copper conducting electrons from point A to point B. Commander Rix's optical array focused on the cables with something approaching horror. Those are incredibly inefficient. They waste enormous amounts of energy as heat dissipation. Yep, Marcus agreed cheerfully. But they work when nothing else does. Which brings us to Chen's third law. Efficiency is meaningless if the system doesn't function. He spent the next hour running his students through practical exercises, diagnosing problems by visual inspection, testing circuits with multimeters, and yes, fixing things by hitting them with hammers. Dr. Zephyli struggled with the physical manipulation required for hands-on work, but her containment suit allowed her to interface with basic tools. Commander Rix approached each task with mechanical precision, though Marcus could see his processors struggling to accept that such crude methods could be effective. Cathar threw herself into the exercises with enthusiasm, clearly enjoying the change from purely theoretical engineering. Chief Chen, she said during a break, I've been thinking about what you said about sophistication versus robustness. Are you familiar with the collapse of the fifth hegemony? Marcus nodded. Every engineering student in the galaxy learned about the fifth hegemony, a civilization so technologically advanced that they had transcended physical existence entirely, living as pure information in quantum computational matrices. They had achieved perfect efficiency, perfect integration, and perfect technological sophistication. They had also vanished overnight when a single programming error cascaded through their integrated systems. Their technology was perfect, Cathar continued. No redundancy, no waste, no inefficiency. Everything was optimized to the theoretical maximum. And when one component failed, Marcus said, there was no backup system to take over. No manual overrides. No way to fix the problem because there was no one left who understood the individual components. He looked around the class. The fifth hegemony forgot Chen's fourth law. Perfect systems are perfectly fragile. Dr. Zephyli's form brightened with understanding. You're suggesting that inefficiency is actually a form of protection. Exactly. Redundancy is inefficient. Manual overrides are wasteful. Backup systems add unnecessary complexity. Marcus gestured to the various primitive tools scattered around the room. But when your primary systems fail, inefficient backups are the only thing standing between you and complete collapse. The class spent the rest of the day working on increasingly complex problems, each one designed to demonstrate the limitations of pure technological solutions. They repaired a malfunctioning gravity generator by replacing a blown fuse. They restored a quantum communication array by cleaning corroded contacts. They fixed a dimensional stabilizer by tightening a loose bolt. As the session ended and his students prepared to return to their respective ships and stations, Marcus noticed Commander Rix lingering behind. The cyborg's optical sensors were focused on a roll of duct tape with apparent fascination. Chief Chen, Rix said, I must confess that your teaching methods have forced me to reconsider several fundamental assumptions about engineering efficiency. Oh? My species replaced our organic components with mechanical ones precisely because biological systems are inefficient, prone to failure, and difficult to optimize. Rix paused, his processes whirring. But today I observed that these same qualities, inefficiency, redundancy, and simplicity, are precisely what made your solutions effective where our optimized systems failed. Marcus nodded. Biological systems evolved to survive, not to be perfect. Sometimes, survival is more important than perfection. Indeed. Rix extended a mechanical manipulator toward the duct tape. May I examine this adhesive material? Of course. Marcus handed over the roll. Just remember, when in doubt, apply liberally and see what happens. As his students filed out, each carrying a basic toolkit that Marcus had insisted they take with them, he felt a familiar satisfaction. It was the same feeling he'd gotten back on the Lucky Strike when he'd managed to keep the engines running with spare parts and determination. The galaxy was finally learning to embrace the power of good enough. And it was about time. The call came at 0347 ship time, jolting Marcus awake from dreams of teaching crystalline collective entities how to change a tire. Admiral Kethvar's image filled the emergency communication screen beside his bunk, her usually composed features tight with urgency. Marcus, we need you at the Nexus immediately. Priority Alpha, emergency. Marcus sat up, instantly alert. In his 5 years as Chief of Practical Engineering, he had never received a Priority Alpha call. Such alerts were reserved for threats to galactic stability, the kind of problems that could affect entire star systems. What's the situation? The Nexus is failing, Kethvar said simply. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. The Nexus wasn't just another space station or starship. It was the central hub of galactic civilization, a massive artificial construct built around a stable wormhole that connected 57 different star systems. Every major trade route, communication link, and transportation network in the galaxy passed through the Nexus. If it failed, how bad? He asked, already pulling on his coveralls. Complete system collapse. Every artificial intelligence on the station has gone into recursive debugging loops. Life support is running on backup power. The wormhole stabilizers are fluctuating. We have maybe 72 hours before the entire structure becomes uninhabitable. Kethvar's image flickered as interference disrupted the transmission. Marcus, 3 million beings live and work on the Nexus. And if we lose the wormhole network, she didn't need to finish. Without the Nexus, the galactic community would fragment into isolated systems. Trade would collapse. Communication would be reduced to generation-long journeys between stars. Everything they had built together over millennia would crumble. I'm on my way, Marcus said. Send me everything you know about the failure. 2 hours later, the simple solution dropped out of hyperspace near the Nexus, and Marcus got his first look at the scope of the problem. The massive station, easily the size of a small moon, was dark except for emergency lighting. The beautiful patterns of energy that normally flowed across its surface had been replaced by chaotic flickers and random sparks. Most alarming of all, the wormhole at its center was pulsing irregularly, its stable blue glow shifting between colors that hurt to look at. Marcus stopped at Emergency Base 7, where he was met by a delegation that represented the cream of galactic engineering. Dr. Zephyr was there, her containment suit crackling with anxious energy. Commander Rix had arrived with a full team of hegemony technicians, their cybernetic enhancements working overtime to process the crisis data. Even the ancient he had met years ago at the Council had manifested, its presence filling the bay with an aura of profound concern. Status report, Marcus said as he stepped off his ship, toolcase in hand. Kethvar, now a full commander herself and leader of the emergency response team, stepped forward. It started 18 hours ago with a routine software update to the station's artificial intelligence network. The update was supposed to improve processing efficiency across all systems. She gestured toward a data display that showed the station's status in painful detail. Instead, it triggered a cascade failure that's affected every intelligence system on the station. Marcus studied the displays, noting the patterns of failure spreading through the network. What kind of cascade? The AIs are caught in infinite loops, Dr. Zephyr explained, her phone flickering with distress. They're trying to debug problems in their own code, but the debugging process is itself part of the problem. Every attempt to fix the issue creates more errors, which triggers more debugging attempts. It's like a snake eating its own tail, added Commander Rix. The more they try to solve the problem, the worse it gets. Marcus nodded grimly. He'd seen similar issues on a smaller scale. systems so complex that they could become confused by their own sophistication. What about manual overrides? That's the core problem, Kefthar said. The Nexus was designed as a fully integrated system. Every function is managed by AI networks. There are no manual controls for critical systems because the designers assumed the AIs would never fail simultaneously. Chen's fourth law strikes again, Marcus muttered. Perfect systems are perfectly fragile. He looked around at the assembled experts. What have you tried so far? For the next hour, they walked him through their attempts to resolve the crisis. They had tried rebooting the AI networks, but the same corrupted software was loaded with every restart. They had tried isolating individual systems, but everything was so interconnected that isolating one component caused failures in dozens of others. They had even tried using backup AI systems from other stations, but those AIs became corrupted within minutes of connecting to the Nexus network. The problem, the Ancient explained in its ethereal voice, is that the Nexus represents the pinnacle of technological integration. Every component depends on every other component. There is no part of this station that can function independently. Marcus was beginning to get a picture of the scope of the disaster. The Nexus wasn't just a space station with malfunctioning computers. It was a single, enormous computer that happened to have people living inside it. And, like any computer with corrupted software, it needed to be fixed at the most basic level. "Show me the central processing core," he said. They traveled deep into the heart of the station, through corridors that seemed to shift and flow around them. Emergency lighting cast weird shadows as they passed through sections where the environmental controls had failed. The air had a sharp, ozone smell from overloaded electrical systems. The central core was a sphere nearly a kilometer in diameter, filled with layers upon layers of quantum processors arranged in complex geometric patterns. Streams of data flowed between them like rivers of light. But instead of the smooth, organized flow that should have characterized a healthy system, the data streams were chaotic, looping, branching, and colliding in random patterns. "Beautiful," Marcus breathed. And it was. Even failing catastrophically, the core was one of the most impressive pieces of engineering he had ever seen. 3 million quantum processing nodes, Cathar said proudly. Each one capable of more calculations per second than the entire human civilization managed in its first 1,000 years. The processing power in this room exceeds the combined computational capacity of most galactic civilizations. And every single one of them is stuck in the same debugging loop, Marcus observed. He pulled out his tablet, his ancient, primitive tablet that had survived countless crises, and tried to connect to the system. The tablet's screen immediately filled with error messages scrolling too fast to read. "Chief Chen," Commander Rick said, "with respect, if our most advanced diagnostic systems cannot resolve this crisis, how can your primitive equipment help?" Marcus looked at the cyborg with a smile. "Because my primitive equipment isn't trying to be helpful." He disconnected the tablet from the network, and the error messages stopped immediately. "Your advanced systems are failing because they're trying to communicate with the corrupted AIs, which pulls them into the same recursive loops. My tablet is too stupid to get confused." He walked around the processing core, studying the physical infrastructure that supported all that computational power. Unlike the elegant, seamless systems he usually encountered, the Nexus core was built for maintenance. There were access panels, diagnostic ports, and even some manual controls scattered throughout the structure. "This station is older than most of your current technologies," he realized aloud. "It was built back when people still believed in having physical backups for critical systems." Indeed, the Ancient confirmed. The Nexus was constructed over 2 millennia ago, during the era when even the most advanced civilizations maintained manual controls for essential functions. Much of that infrastructure remains, though it has not been used for centuries. Marcus felt a familiar excitement building. So somewhere in here, there should be a way to manually shut down the AI network and restart the station's basic functions. Theoretically, Dr. Zeffali said, but such controls would be buried beneath layers of technological upgrades. Even if we could find them, we would need to understand systems that haven't been activated in over 1,000 years. Then it's a good thing I brought my reading materials, Marcus said, pulling out a collection of technical manuals that he had salvaged from various human cargo ships over the years. The books were actual physical books, printed on paper, bound in plastic, and entirely immune to electronic corruption. For the next 6 hours, Marcus disappeared into the technical documentation while the assembled experts watched in fascination. He cross-referenced outdated system specifications, traced power routing through century-old diagrams, and slowly began to understand how the Nexus had been designed before it became the sophisticated, integrated marvel it was today. "Here," he said finally, pointing to a schematic that showed the station's original control architecture. Emergency Command Center 7. It was designed as a backup facility for manual station management. If it still exists, it should have physical controls for all critical systems. Kethtar checked her station maps. That section has been sealed for centuries. According to the records, it was incorporated into the AI network core during the 5th integration upgrade, which means, Marcus said with growing excitement, that it's probably exactly where we need to go. Finding Emergency Command Center 7 required cutting through 3 levels of decorative paneling, bypassing 2 security doors that had been sealed so long their opening mechanisms had fossilized, and crawling through maintenance tunnels that hadn't been designed for human-sized beings. The assembled experts followed Marcus through increasingly cramped and primitive areas of the station, their sophisticated equipment proving useless in spaces designed for manual labor. Finally, they emerged into a chamber that looked like a museum of ancient technology. Control panels lined the walls, covered with switches, dials, and readouts that belonged to an era when Starship controls required physical manipulation. Dust covered everything, and several of the light panels had failed, leaving large areas in shadow. "Incredible," breathed Commander Rix. "These control systems are centuries old." "Which means," Marcus said, flipping switches and watching as ancient displays slowly came to life, "they predate every software upgrade, every AI integration, and every sophisticated improvement that's currently failing." He worked his way across the control panel, bringing system after system online. "Ladies, gentlemen, and energy beings, I present to you the Nexus as it existed before anyone tried to make it perfect." The displays showed a very different view of the station than the sophisticated interfaces they were used to. Instead of elegant holographic representations and AI-interpreted data streams, they saw crude bar graphs, numerical readouts, and simple status indicators. But the information was clear and accurate. More accurate, in fact, than the corrupted data they had been getting from the modern systems. "Environmental systems functioning at 67% capacity," Marcus read from one display. "Primary power at 34% and declining. Wormhole stabilizers operating, but fluctuating outside normal parameters." He looked up at the assembled team. "The station isn't actually dying. It's just confused." "What do you mean?" Kethar asked. "I mean the hardware is fine. The quantum processors are working perfectly. The environmental systems, the power grid, the structural integrity systems, they're all functioning within acceptable parameters." Marcus pointed to the ancient displays. "The problem is purely software. The AIs are so busy debugging themselves that they're not paying attention to actually running the station." Dr. Zephyli's form flickered with hope. "Are you suggesting we can resolve the crisis simply by bypassing the artificial intelligence network temporarily?" "Yes." Marcus began working his way through the manual control sequences, referring frequently to the technical manuals. "These controls can run the stations.